What happens when school leaders stop evaluating and start listening? Hi there, I'm Stan Baker along with co-hosts Shelley Steele and Steve Young. We're retired educators who worked in Ontario, Canada, in neighboring school districts using restorative practices, and now we're coaching principals and staffs in restorative practices. Our guest this episode is Craig Randall of Trust-Based Observations. With him, we reflect on the power of listening in leadership, particularly replacing judgmental observations of teachers with reflective, curiosity-driven dialogue that values teachers as professionals.
This episode is brought to you by the word trust from a Norse word. Trust meaning strength or firmness. This roots trust not just in belief or hope, but in resilience and stability. Trust is both a verb and a noun, but its impact changes depending on how it's used. As a noun, trust is something we give or receive. As a verb, it's an action we choose. This duality reminds principals that trust isn't just a feeling, it's something you actively build, extend, and demonstrate.
Our website, www.restorative.ca, is for principals who deal with conflict, who want to make it right in schools, and who want to make it about kids learning. And if you're new to your role in the last 4 years or so, send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. Let's join the conversation with your host, Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. Let's start with listening versus telling. What's been happening that has shaped what you do in the work that you do?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it started with my mentor in my supervision class, where we would do 10-minute mini observations and we'd script, which I don't do now, but then we would start the reflective conversation, not by telling. We would start by asking two questions. What were you doing to help the students learn? And if you had the chance to do it again, what might you do differently? And so I think I got really lucky. I didn't really, as an administrator, get to experience any other way doing it. So instantly, we're listening. And what I can tell you is in my very first assistant principal job, instantly I could tell teachers loved it. They loved having their strengths shared with them for sure, but they loved that you wanted to hear what they had to say. And I don't think I knew it back then, but I think the message I know it sends now is I value you. You're the professional in your classroom. What do you think? And so I think by listening, it starts to build a trusting relationship right away. And they are professionals and they might not get it right. Like we might not always get it right, but let's have a frank talk about it. And so when we can start by asking and listening, and then also when you've taken out the ratings of pedagogy, so that fear isn't there, instantly people feel comfortable. And it's a dialogue as opposed to a one-way, here's what you did, here's what you did, here's your score, all the thing, which puts people on the defensive. And if they're going to talk, it's going to be, what can I say that's right versus what can I say that's wrong? We will frequently do schools that have been doing the Danielson model. And we always ask people afterwards, what do you think of this? What do you want to talk about in comparison? They'll frequently say things like, with the other, I'm always thinking, okay, how am I supposed to say this in the Danielson way? Which isn't, then it's not a real conversation. So it frames things instantly differently when you listen. The whole dynamic changes.
So where did those questions come from? Because I think it's great to ask questions, but you can also ask questions that can just be very off-putting. So I think that those two questions are key.
I think that's a really good point. Like a lot of times the first question will be when they ask a question, how do you think it went? And I feel like that's loaded. Or do you think it went well? And I think on the receiving end, it feels loaded. So even then you're going to be cautious as well. So really they came from my mentor, Warren Aller at Western Washington University in Bellingham. And that's what he did. But interestingly, what he told me down the road was he got them way back from Madeline Hunter. And back in the day, and she actually, the work that she did, which really codified what elements of good teaching were for the first time in the 80s, people turned it into teacher observation after A Nation at Risk. And she was like, no, this isn't supposed to be, you're not supposed to see all these things. Stop evaluating people on that. And interestingly, she wrote her own teacher observation book, which is really excellent. And I think it came from those originally.
Yeah, there's a lot of judgment in how do you think it went.
Ooh.
right? And as soon as you feel judged, you're going to be defensive. And I guess that's been my experience with most teacher observations.
In the US, and I know it varies at different places in Canada, but like ratings is a part of it. I have to put you on a 1 to 4 scale. Actually, I talked to somebody this morning and they said they have a 0 to 4 scale. And I
Oh,
thought, oh my
zero.
word, why
That's
would you even use the word zero? That's so horrible.
that's
But
a toughie.
as soon as you've got some kind of a system in there that puts a number on it, the research says that diminishes relational trust instantly between observer and observee, which causes the teachers to play it safe and not take risks or innovate.
Yeah. But, and I come from Ontario and having been a principal for 20 plus years, did hundreds of teacher observations, and we had to follow the model that was given to us. And when they rejigged it all in the early 2000s, we had a four, there's a rating of 1 of 4, and it wasn't numbers, it was excellent, good, fair, and poor.
Yeah.
And where we got the biggest pushback was, what about very good? I think I'm very good. There was nothing between good and excellent. So we would argue, and they would get their report and they would file a grievance with 10 pages of anecdotal evidence of why they should be better than they were. And after a few years of this, we were tired of it. Administrators were complaining, teachers were complaining, everybody's complaining. So they just went to a pass fail. And so it's still an evaluation, but it's a pass fail. I would start every conversation after an observation was, okay, first of all, you've passed. Now let's talk. Let's talk about what's going on. And
Yeah. Then now, okay, now that's out of the
yeah,
way.
that's
Let's
out of
just
the way.
talk.
Now let's just talk about what I saw. And so we were told that we followed this model called COP, Conversations, Observations, and Products. Teachers would give us all their day books and lesson plans, and those were the products. And I flipped it and I said, I don't want to see your products yet. I want to come in and do the observation. Then we're going to have a conversation about what I saw. And the conversation was what you were talking about right at the beginning. It was just ask some questions. I saw a math lesson, and how do you think that went? And what effect did you think that lesson had on the kids and their learning? And how do you know that? And we would just initiate this conversation, and it just went organically to where I wanted it to go, and then they felt this is great. I passed. We had a good conversation, and of course, we had to submit certain areas for improvement or whatever it was that the form asked us to do. Far less confrontational. I appreciate that it's about the questions you ask as opposed to you did this and that was wrong, you did this, that was great, and putting that evaluative piece on everything I saw. Let's flip it on the teacher and say, how did you think that went? And what would you do differently next time in that lesson? And have you thought about whether the kids achieved that goal, etc.? So it's where we were coming from.
It's the reflection piece that allows for growth, isn't it? And isn't that really what you're trying to do, is support growth or encourage growth? And if we don't ask people to reflect on that and then ask how we can support them or what their next steps are, then you're not going to see growth the same way. And yeah, evaluation we know has to be there for a piece, but it really shouldn't be the weight. It's the reflection piece that really encourages people to do things differently or the same or build on what they're already creating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're exactly right. It is the reflection. And I think there's a lot of pieces to that. And so, one, we do have to have a core idea of what is good practice. What are we looking for? And I think our form is really highly specific in just core areas of pedagogy. And so that gives everyone the same common lens, but it is about growth. And that's the ultimate point, is to improve teaching and learning and creating the conditions that are best going to allow that. And that's building a trusting relationship with the teachers. And then even what they want to get better at, it is great. At the same time, we all have blind spots. I know every week when I'm on the road training a school in trust-based observations, sometimes it's a tiny thing, sometimes it's a big thing. Someone will say something that will make trust-based observations better. I'm the guy that developed this, and I have enough blind spots for every week somebody tells me something. So it's also, then we use that lens of those areas of practice to help with that blind spot. But even then, it's also about support. It's not, hey, I want you to get better at that. Because as observers, if we think about the way we traditionally try to help our teachers get better, and we're to compare that to the way that we want teachers to give feedback to students, the hypocrisy is astoundingly embarrassing. Like, we would never say to a third grader, hey, those multiplication facts, they could use some work. Here's a times table. I'll see you in a month. But that's often what we do. Hey, I want you to get better at that. Or, hey, I want you to get better at that. Here's an article. We have to support and guide and work with you along the way, just like we would with a teacher if we really want to see growth happen. And I want to say one more thing about evaluation. We do have to evaluate. Every job in the world has to evaluate. I don't have to evaluate pedagogy to make my decisions. I can evaluate you on your professionalism, how I get along with others, your planning, my mindset towards growth, which is what we recommend you do. And if you're a teacher that's struggling as a teacher, I guarantee you will struggle in 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of those areas. So in that worst case scenario, not rating pedagogy never gets in the way of having to do that thing that nobody really wants to do.
Do you have any examples of schools where things went really well because of this, or where they had some real challenges implementing what you're saying?
Luckily, we haven't had any challenges with implementation. It's all about building mastery. So we spend a week of intensive work learning by doing over and over again. But we definitely had some examples, a lot of examples of impact. And so one is there's a school in California we work with, economically depressed oil town, 80% free and reduced lunch, 60% Hispanic. And when I went and observed them the first time or worked with them the first time, it was pretty traditional. A lot of rows, people caring, but they were teaching probably like when we went to school, what school is. And then about 9 months later, the superintendent messaged me and said, Craig, all the teachers came to us and they'd been seeing the form over and over again because we see them about once a month. And they said, we need to get better. Just by going over it, they'd relaxed and were able to self-analyze. And then we came back, and then just this December, they got their first California standardized test results after a full year of implementation. Their math scores, the percentage of students that reach proficient, rose by 7.25%, and ELA by 12.75%. So that's like hard data. I'm not obsessed with numbers, but I know it matters. TBO transforms culture in a week. And I've got 1 or 2 stories that we can talk about that. One, we do this all over the world. And so we do a lot of international schools. And I was leaving an international school in Cambodia. And the superintendent and I were walking out on Friday afternoon, and we came across 3 different teachers that we hadn't observed that week, because you can only do so many when you're training. And they all said almost verbatim the same thing. And they all had the same sort of wistful tone as they said something along the lines of, oh, I thought you were going to observe me. So think about that. Observations, the thing that you think teachers dislike most, by the end of 5 days of training, they're saying, no fair, I didn't get my turn being observed. And the reason that happened is because teachers are huge gossips. So as soon as the first reflective conversations happen, what does everyone do? What was it like? What was it like? What was it like? And everyone hears how great it was to hear their bucket filled with strengths, because it's a strengths-based model. We're going to help people grow a lot more when we work from their strengths than we work from their deficits. They're going to be much more open. And after hearing that, they're like, I want to experience the same thing too. So that's one story. And so I'll tell you another one. We were training a school in the UK, and they had 2 insanely toxic head teachers before the brilliant head teacher that's there now, whose heart is like just gigantic. And so they didn't do observations during COVID, as many people didn't, smartly in my mind. And so she read the book, was super excited, had me out. She sent them an email the week before, thinking they'd be so excited, the word trust in observations. And she emails me panicked, saying, Craig, I don't know if we can do this. My teachers are freaking out. You speak to them on Monday morning. And one of the teachers before, just to give you a sense of how toxic it was, had called the teacher the C word, and I don't mean crap, in front of other teachers. That's how toxic it was, just to give you a perspective, like insanely toxic. And so now they're thinking, oh my God, we're going to go back to what we were doing before. And so I spoke to them on Monday, and I just said, look, here's the goal of trust-based observations. It's for us to develop enough trust with each of you so that any of us can come into your classroom, observe you, see you trying something new, even though it's highly unlikely. Have that thing you're trying be a train wreck, but as opposed to a traditional observation where you'd be freaking out that happened on observation day, you won't be worried, because you know the next day the first thing we're going to say is, Shelley, I love it that you were trying something new. High five, fist bump. Because when we say when that happens, what'll happen? Everyone will keep trying new things, and we know we'll get better. So on the Wednesday, we observed the teacher that was, by everyone's account, and later on I found out her own account, the most change-averse teacher in the school. And they had some Kagan cooperative learning training a couple weeks before. I'm a big proponent. So she was doing that to prepare. And so we went in and she tried Kagan while we were there, and it went really well. And so we had the reflective conversation. And afterwards, we were asking her what she thought. And she said, I never ever would have done that before for an observation. And probably I'm not even sure I would have really even put it into my practice. But I heard what you said and I thought, oh, what the heck. And then she said what I think is the most important thing. She said, as teachers, we just want to be appreciated and heard. And I'm going to give a postscript to this. The next day, the school leader that led that reflective conversation said, you guys won't believe what happened. Yesterday, I was walking out at the same time as this teacher, and she just happened to see me and she said, oh, she said, I just have to tell you, today meant more to me than you'll ever know. And gave me a big hug. And then 2 days afterwards, the Tuesday afterwards, so 7 days of implementation, the head teacher wrote me and said, Craig, the healing has begun. You can just feel it. The hallways are buzzing. That's impact.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to see collective teacher efficacy in action. That's where we're going to see improvement.
Go, Steve.
After your 5 days or 7 days training or whatever, what is the carryover? How does it continue on after you've done the training, you've planted the seeds, as it were, and then you're gone? How does that school carry forward, and how does the strength continue to build?
For sure. And that's why we've all gone to conferences and we've seen a great session. We've come back and implemented it, sometimes with success and sometimes with disaster. And when it's disaster, what do? Throw it in the bin. Research on mastery says you need to do something 6 or 7 times. So we're out at your school and we're doing it 12 to 14 times over the course of the week with your leadership team. Yeah. So one, you've got it down really well, just the basic core part of it that's building trust. But there's a part where we ask permission to offer suggestion, which I touched on just a little bit earlier. And what we find is the week is so intensive. It's really like doing a 5-credit class in a week, is that we'll go over that on Friday afternoon, but it's not really resonating. And I didn't realize that at first. And so people started to say, Craig, could you come back and show us that part? Because it's just not sticking with us. And so we don't mandate it, but we recommend we come back and we do the piece where we ask permission to offer a suggestion. So like I said, we're looking at the 9 areas. So let's just say, Stan, I really liked your practice. I thought on working memory, you were dividing up activities really well, so you were never going over cognitive load, but maybe you weren't really building in the reflection and processing activities to have it work its way from working memory into long-term memory. So at the end of the reflective conversation, we're going to ask permission to offer a suggestion because people don't like to be told. So I'm going to say, hey, Stan, I have a suggestion on working memory, especially adding in the reflect and processing pieces. Would you like to hear? You're going to say,
yes, please.
And you're way more open to it because I asked. I don't know what the little difference is in that, but it makes a gigantic difference. And then because the form has professional development hyperlinks built into it that are actionable, I'm going to pull up an article, and I'm probably going to have a hard copy of a list of 78 different activities that could be these little 1 to 2 minute processing activities. And I'm going to say, hey, Stan, let's look at this. Pick 6 or 8 that you think really resonate for your kids. And then we're going to say, look, if we were just going to try this with just one of your preps, which one would you want to try it with? Okay, look, let's pull up tomorrow's lesson and let's just look at it. So you're high schoolers, their cognitive load's about 10 minutes. Where do you think there's matches in there about every 10 minutes where we could build one in? Okay, good. Which one of those 6 or 8 would you put in there? There. Then we say, okay, awesome. Let's do this tomorrow. There's 3 ways we could do it. I could come in and model it. We could co-teach it, or you could teach and I can watch and either give you feedback in the moment or give it to you afterwards. And then whichever one they do, we do. And then we have another conversation afterwards again, and we ask variants of the first 2 questions. What went well with the new strategy? What would you like to keep working on with the new strategy? And we think this is the most important question. What can I do to support you to build this into your practice fully so by the next time I see you, it's going to be happening? So in the framework of a question, I've really laid out an expectation. And really, I already gave you the support. Not that I'm not willing to give you continuing support. And then we see true growth. In my home state of Washington, I was doing that part 2 training. And we went and we watched the teacher. He was a brilliant, young 26-year-old guy. And he was doing stuff where they were doing something and then they were working with partner A and B, but it wasn't really equal participation. And so we thought if we tightened up with a more specific Kagan structure, it would really help to make higher learning for everyone. So we talked to him about it. Which way do you choose? He chose to have the one where we watch. And so then afterwards, we were asking him those questions and everything. And he said, I have to tell you, because we left when it was recess. He said, when the kids came back from recess, they said, oh, can we keep doing that? So first off, that's a win right there. But then this is my favorite part. So then this is actually, I have a podcast where we interview my teachers that are really good that we watch when we're doing this. And so I'm interviewing him and he said, so I have to tell you, then the following Monday when I met with my grade level team, I said, you guys, we all got to do this. And so now the whole team's doing it. And I was really lucky. John Hattie endorsed the book and he says trust-based observations is collective teacher efficacy in action. And is that not collective teacher efficacy in action when I'm sharing it with my whole team and getting my team to do it? That's the highest effect size.
In my previous role as an elementary principal, I did not see how teacher observations could become the occasion to build trust and relationships with the teachers that I work with. I really appreciate Craig Randall's shift from a rating pedagogy to supporting teacher development through personalized, low-threat feedback loops. These were terrific stories about relational, trust-based learning and how this can transform school culture and spark measurable improvements in student learning. So what do you think? What resonated with you? What challenges do you face with teacher observations? Take 5 minutes to share your observations in the link that's in the podcast description. Teacher observations present excellent opportunities for teachers and principals to build connection and trust. And if you're new to your role as a principal or vice principal and you're struggling with teacher observations, email me, stan@restorative.ca, and we can have a conversation about building those connections.